Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute, JohnJDwyer.com, me, Gwen Faulconer Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwoods, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with award-winning author and historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. Here now on Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history through the stories we share. John J. Dwyer, what is this story?
Well, Gwen, today we go back to the January 1946 day on which Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher walked onto the Norman campus of the University of Oklahoma and applied for admission as not only the first African-American law school student there, but the first post-secondary school black student anywhere in the state besides all-black Langston University. The history of the Sooner State forever changed from that day. But it was not Fisher's first connection with the stage of Oklahoma history. Her son, historian Bruce Fisher, told me that the Tulsa race riot is the reason my mother grew up in Chickasha and not Tulsa. Prior to Ada's birth, her family's home was one of the hundreds burned down in the 1921 Tulsa race war debacle. Daughter of a Church of God in Christ pastor father and devoted NAACP volunteer mother, Ada excelled academically at Chickasha's segregated Lincoln High School. She served as senior class valedictorian. Two experiences spurred her toward a dream of becoming a lawyer to help others. One was a visit to the Chicago law office of her mother's cousin. The other was hearing black future United States Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, already well known for his legal efforts to secure equal educational opportunities for African Americans, hearing him speak in person at her Chickasha High School. Meanwhile, she married Warren Fisher in 1944 and graduated from Langston in 1945. Thus began her years-long pursuit of admittance as a black woman to the University of Oklahoma Law School. It occurred as the most dramatic advances in the emerging African-American civil rights effort of that mid-20th century era unfolded in the educational environs where so much of what enabled or prevented Americans' success in many other fields of endeavor took place. Fisher's alma mater, Langston, founded in 1897 by Edward McCabe and others as a school for blacks, had served the community on a monumental scale. 43 white colleges in the state, however, each with far superior political clout at the state capitol and thus better access to legislated dollars, kept Langston at the back of the bus in budgeted higher education funds. Among other consequences, this meant that African American college students, because state law prevented their enrollment at any other Oklahoma college, could pursue degree programs for only a tiny cadre of professions. These included teaching and nursing. So determined was the state to keep black students off its campuses that it provided African American taxpayer funds to attend colleges in other states. Oklahoma, and that's something that we don't realize looking back in our history, but it's true.
That's amazing.
You could go to school and have it paid for going out of state, but couldn't even get on the campus in state. Well, Oklahoma and national reformers collaborated in a multi-pronged strategy to advance the cause of justice for blacks. It employed wit and ingenuity and avoided violence and discord. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, spearheaded by the aforementioned Thurgood Marshall, its chief counsel, had already won several high-profile civil rights cases argued before the United States Supreme Court. The NAACP decided in 1945 to challenge the segregation laws of Oklahoma. They would support African American student applicants to the Sooner State's major universities. Their strategy took visible and dramatic form the morning of January 14, 1946. Newspaper publisher Roscoe Dunjee who had labored for black constitutional rights for decades, along with W.A.J. Bullock and Ada Fisher, all of them African American, met with white University of Oklahoma President George Lynn Cross. Dungy served on the NAACP's National Board of Directors and as president of the Oklahoma State Conference of Branches of the NAACP. His Black Dispatch newspaper proved a determined advocate for black civil rights. Bullock, meanwhile, headed the Chickasha NAACP. Fisher, brilliant and beautiful, wanted admittance to the OU School of Law. Law professor Cheryl Elizabeth Brown Whatley won the 2015 Oklahoma Book Award for nonfiction with her work, A Step Toward Brown versus Board of Education, Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher and Her Fight to End Segregation. Whatley unpacked how Marshall and his colleagues considered Fisher the perfect person for the historic task ahead of them. Quoting Whatley now, "We take into account the fact that Ada Lois is a very attractive woman of color, family has economic independence, and that her father is with the Church of God in Christ, and her parents are well established in their own right. Her brother is an Army veteran. It is like a very nice starring character in this role that will unfold before her." And that's the end of the quote. As expected, the university, hamstrung by the Oklahoma Constitution's old segregation laws, rejected Fisher's application. Cross explained to Fisher and her older colleagues that he opposed the applicable state law, but he could not afford the enormous fine that he could personally face on a daily basis should he allow Fisher admittance. He did, however, aid Fisher's budding legal effort by stating race as the grounds for her rejection, which Dungy requested him to do, though Cross could have given other reasons. Meanwhile, Black Tulsa attorney Amos T. Hall went to court for Fisher, but the Cleveland County District Court ruled against her. Marshall argued the 14th Amendment on her behalf before the Oklahoma Supreme Court and lost. That court then refused to rehear the case. Finally, in 1948, after 3 years, Hall and the NAACP lawyers took Fisher's case to the United States Supreme Court and won. Their frustration continued, however. The state determined, though it had to provide Fisher a law school education, it did not have to do so at OU, since the Supremes had not addressed the issue of segregation, still the norm across the South, including Oklahoma. Thus, the state legislature created the laughable Langston University School of Law in Oklahoma City. Fisher refused to attend it. Hall, Marshall, Dungy, and the NAACP, though, did not relent. They recognized a second wall of resistance to black students beyond the issue of equal educational opportunity as the state's segregational social practices. Crucially, these intrepid African American reformers also perceived the costly challenge required for Oklahoma to provide the Supreme Court mandated equal higher education opportunities for blacks while retaining segregated classrooms. So they shifted their emphasis away from the Fisher case. They unleashed a host of other applicants on OU who wished to pursue academic tracks not offered at Langston. And we'll find out what happened with this effort, as well as how OU students responded, and a memorable bag full of golden nuggets after the break.
Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher. This is Oklahoma Gold. Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher. John J. Dwyer, what is this story?
Amazing the backstories that remind us that history doesn't occur in a vacuum or just by chance. You might say there's always golden threads and sometimes golden nuggets to it, and certainly there was in the amazing life of Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher. And in fact, during that time, Gwen, the 1940s, the late 1940s, debate was raging on all levels, including at the OU campus regarding the admission of black students everywhere. Nearly 300 white students, meanwhile, staged a public demonstration on the North Oval at OU in favor of segregationist educational policies. Then, Over 1,000 white students and faculty, braving a 15-degree temperature and ankle-deep snow, rallied on the same oval to protest the school's refusal to admit African Americans. So it was a hot issue. Late 1940s, we don't realize it didn't just start happening in the 60s and 70s. In addition, white students and faculty during that big protest in favor of allowing admission of blacks at the College of Education and the School of Home Economics, they opened their frosty windows and watched this take place, this big rally. Students Howard Friedman of Oklahoma City, Wanda Lou Howard of Marlow, and Jack Bales of Dewey boldly spoke on behalf of the African Americans seeking admission to OU. Friedman was quoted in the Oklahoma City Times newspaper as follows, quote, "You and I have an obligation to protect the Negro students and any other minority group. Second-class citizenship cannot exist. This is an extension of the Hitler myth. We thought we did away with it. Let it be known that OU is receptive to equal education. We are not hypocrites. Draw up petitions and send them to the regents," end quote. Well, the massed assembly, indoors and out, roared their approval. And OU President George Lynn Cross later recalled that most of the university's 12,000 students at the time had no feelings one way or another on the matter of campus integration. "I've never doubted that Negroes could have been admitted to the institution at that time without serious protest," he later said. Well, gradually, courts ruled that retired Langston professor George McLaurin, who was probably around 60 years of age and had applied for admission to OU, that he and other blacks could attend, but they would be segregated. He had applied for admission to the graduate school. Well, Marshall, in concert with the Oklahoma NAACP leaders, initiated a new legal challenge. It aimed for nothing less than the end of segregation itself in the state and ultimately America. The University of Oklahoma provided the gateway to their journey. Cross quoted one prominent Oklahoma African American as saying during this time that, quote, "In the main, Negro students were actually receiving good treatment, and their instructors and the student body had been unusually fine in their attitude toward them. Everyone seemingly feels that the university's authorities are doing all that they possibly can within the precincts of the recent law passed by the legislature," end quote. So I think it's important when we look back, this wasn't a case where you had people, having Ku Klux Klan rallies and carrying torches and, doing abominable deeds to these black students. The rank and file of the students and faculty that were white were friendly toward them, and most of them were fine with them being admitted, but the law stood counterposed to that. Well, the times, though, were a-changin', and so were many Oklahomans' views. The State Board of Regents, the Attorney General, George Lynn Cross, they all changed their minds, although Cross had long privately supported educational integration. And finally, on June 5th, 1950, the United States Supreme Court ruled OU in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment as a public university for admitting George McLaurin, then treating him differently because of his race. The doors to the state's largest school swung all the way open for blacks, including Ada Lois Fisher. Eventually, they would do so in all Oklahoma schools. Fisher's successful years-long pursuit of admittance as an African American to the OU School of Law, meanwhile, led to her earning a law degree in 1952, 6 years after first applying for admission there. She practiced law in Chickasha, then a 30-year career in leadership at Langston. Along the way, she earned a master's degree in history from OU, and then that school awarded her a doctorate of humane letters. And in 1992, Governor David Walters appointed her to the OU Board of Regents, an event of surpassing historical poignance and significance. Ada Fisher had risen to the highest level of educational leadership, the governing board for the very school which had once, more than once, denied her admittance. And following her 1995 passing, as we close, OU dedicated the Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher Garden on its main campus in Norman. A bronze plaque memorialized her contribution to the state of Oklahoma. On it were carved the words, in Psalm 118, the psalmist speaks of how the stone that the builders once rejected becomes the cornerstone.
Now that's Oklahoma Gold.